Cool. I love that. I would say welcome. Hello. My name is Will, and welcome to the DevPoint Labs Meetup. This is Dave. He is our lead instructor. He actually teaches the Rails course and he teaches the JavaScript course. I think it's pretty cool. I just wanted to point out that we have some JavaScript students here. We have some Rails students here. And the whole group back there, those are all alumni from previous cohorts. They were all on the cohort together, so they're just made them like mean girls. They should be If you guys have any questions, or if you guys are new to DevPoint Labs or programming boot camp, we teach primarily Ruby on Rails, JavaScript. We have, those are some of the main things we teach. We obviously have a full stack course, we have a part-time course, and we have a UX course as well. If you have any questions, Dave is knowledgeable about all these things. Also, we have TAs, we have staff around. So Parker back there, he's a JavaScript TA. Tasha back there, she's a JavaScript TA. And then Garrett in the very back, he's a Rails TA as well. So if you have any questions about the course, or if you have any questions, feel free to ask anybody. But other than that, go to the meetup. Oh, and if you guys didn't get tacos or want more tacos, they're in the lounge right across the classroom in the one. Cool.
Right. Well, thanks everyone for coming, or if you just got out of class, for staying, or if it's your normal class time, for skipping class. So today we're going to talk about React JavaScript without all of the tooling that goes along with it. So whether you've never seen JavaScript before, or you've never seen React before, if you are aspiring to be a web developer, you will run into React in your career. It's just the way things are going, even if you don't work with it. I think it's a great library. I'm super passionate about it. Most articles I write are about React. So that's me. So we can't really do this follow-along style. There's a lot of people, and there is a couple of dependencies needed. But I write, and I'll share this in the meetup too. I write a lot of, starting to write a lot of my thoughts down on this GitHub IO page. So I have this topic here that we're going to go over tonight, ReactJS without tooling. There is some ES 2015 syntax involved. So if that's brand new to you, I have another follow-along tutorial that I wrote on ES 6. So this is just open to everyone. A couple things about it. I don't proofread these articles. I usually write them late at night. I make a lot of typos. I usually don't write them back to back, so sometimes some context gets missed. Or I might be talking in the first person and then I switch to third person. So, also I am opinionated. And I think that's important with JavaScript, not that you take my opinion, but that you become opinionated, because it's not opinionated right now. It's all over the place. So you need to sort of develop your own set of bounds that you want to follow. So mine are reflected inside of these articles. You'll see things that you might see other developers say, absolutely don't do it this way. Fine, do it their way. It doesn't matter. Just form an opinion. I do make sure that the code works. So you should, if you go through these follow-ons, your project should work. There's nothing wrong with it. But if you do see something, I'm open to pull requests. So if you know how to use GitHub, fix it, and I'll merge it in. So the one we are going to go through today is ReactJS sans tooling, which basically means ReactJS without all of the tooling that normally comes along with it. So the biggest roadblock with React, the library itself is actually very simple. The roadblock is that there is just a myriad of tooling that's involved with setting up React. And the reason why is because React is platform agnostic, which means I can put React in a plain HTML page. I can put React with Express or Node. I can use React with Rails or Java or .NET. And because of that, there is a lot of tooling involved to actually get React to work. So I find that when people are learning React, they get stuck on the tooling and they never progress into the library. So what I want to go through today is how to get started with React and be able to ignore the tooling completely. So you can just focus on the syntax, the library, things like that. Okay. So Pete Hunt, if anyone follows sort of the Facebook group that put React together, Pete Hunt worked at Facebook, and then he was the development manager at Instagram, and now he's gone on to bigger and better things, if there is such a thing. He sort of has a recommendation of how he thinks you should learn React. So first, learn React by itself. This has actually been kind of difficult up until just recently because, again, you start to go through tutorials and they're so full of Webpack and Babel and should I use Browserify and all these other things that you never actually get the library up and running to start toying with it. Then he says learn NPM. Then you can learn JavaScript bundlers, and this is where the tooling gets involved. And then learn ES6. Pete Hunt is brilliant. I disagree with him. I teach React with ES6 because all the documentation is moving to that. And then learn routing, and then learn Flux Redux. This is sort of the order that you should learn these things so that they're not overwhelming all at once. And then there's some additional topics that often come up when we're dealing with React. Inline styles is a big thing with React, so you can ignore that for now. Server-side rendering is a hot topic. This means that we're rendering our HTML and our JavaScript on the server before we ever send it to the client. It's better for SEO. It's better for a lot of reasons. It's also extremely difficult to do. So when you're learning React, stay away from server-side rendering. This will just clog you up. A couple other libraries that seem to go well with React are Relay and GraphQL. If you don't work at Facebook, you're probably not going to work with GraphQL anytime soon. So these are just some terms as you're researching and going on Reddit or whatever. You're going to run into these terms. That's what they mean. I would stay away from them until you're comfortable with React. Okay. Talked a little bit about tooling. Okay, so what is ReactJS? ReactJS is a library. It's not a framework. Right? It's just a single library. It's a JavaScript library that I can put in any project and use it. It was created originally by Jordan Walk. He was working at Facebook on the marketing team, and he got sick and tired of doing all this weird jQuery stuff to manipulate the DOM. And then by the time someone else got to the code, DOM elements were gone and everything was breaking, and he said there has to be a better way than just grabbing elements and physically moving them if I want to change the page. Right? So he created this little pet project. Facebook quickly adopted it and rolled it out. Now they have a team of some of the most brilliant developers out there, led by Dan Abramoff, and that's where we're at with React now. It's open source, so anyone can use it. A lot of people, if you're familiar with the term MVC, a lot of people look at React as the view. So it's just for the UI layer. Okay, so a couple of key features with React. First of all, it's one-way data flow. So if you've had any experience with frameworks like Angular, it's two-way data binding. And so React said, that's a little bit of a confusing approach. It's hard to keep track of the state of your application. Let's make everything one way from the top down. So I have this top-level component that can talk to any children components. And then if the children component need to talk back to the parent, they need to go all the way back up the chain, right? So it's one-way only data binding, which when you start working with React, you'll see the benefit of that. The second thing is React uses the virtual DOM. So what the virtual DOM is, we have the real DOM, right? All the elements on this web page, and then there's a copy of this web page in memory. What this allows React to do is anytime data changes, it can take a look at the real DOM, it can take a look at the virtual DOM, and it can check the difference, so it does a diff on these, and it only updates the part of the web page that changed. So we're not reloading the page for the user just because they added an item to a to-do list. The next thing is JSX, and this is why React took so long to actually catch on. Because JSX is it's a kind of a cross between HTML, JavaScript, and XML. What this means is we can actually write HTML inside of our JavaScript libraries. And I'm an instructor here. For years, we've been teaching people to separate your concerns. Take your controller over here, your model over here, your view over here, your HTML's over here, your CSS is over here, your JavaScript's over here, and they're all separate. So this was kind of hard for a lot of developers that have been around for a while to say, for my entire career, I've been taught to not write JavaScript in my HTML, and now you're asking me to write JavaScript in my HTML. Get over that hurdle in your mind because it's actually amazing. It's no longer separations of concerns, now it's separation of technologies. So I have my server over here, and my client over here, and my client can now all be written in one file, and it's super fast, super efficient. Okay, so why do we want to use React? First of all, it's incredibly fast. It's way better user experience. There's no detectable client-side latency. I can change what the user's looking at without reloading their page extremely fast. JavaScript is structured in React. So we're used to having just this spaghetti code JavaScript file, and we don't really know where anything is. Now everything's more structured. It's a modern web experience. Happy developers. I love writing in React. I think most people that have worked with React will have the same experience. We can do server-side rendering, which is really cool. This helps with search engine optimization. This helps for those weird people that turn JavaScript off in their browsers. They're still going to get the same experience. And even though React came out before ES 2015, which is the newest version of JavaScript, it's almost like they were on this collision course to work perfectly together. So we'll kind of go through that. Okay, so there's other options besides React, obviously. There's Angular, there's Ember, there's Handlebars, there's all kinds of different stuff. So when we're talking about frameworks like Angular and Ember, the reason we might use React instead of one of these is because React is not a framework. These are frameworks. So that means our model, our view, and our controller are all contained in this one thing, and it's very tightly coupled. That means that I can't just go put a little bit of Angular into an app, right? I have to rewrite a large portion of the app in order to do that. With React, I could maybe make just this one word React, so I can sprinkle it into my application as needed, where it makes sense. Also, React is a very small library. They work every day to make it smaller and more performant. All right, so this is kind of just a little visual of how the virtual DOM works. So what we have over here, this is our DOM, meaning this is what the user is looking at when they're on your website. This is your p tags and your h3s and your spans. This is your DOM. Document Object Model. So we might have an unordered list with just a 1 and a 2 in it, and then maybe some posts down here in another list. And over here in memory, we have the virtual DOM. So the virtual DOM might look like this, because data changed, right? Instead of 2 elements in our array that we're rendering out, now we have 3 elements in our array. So the old way of doing things was to just reload this page and force the user to re-download all your JavaScript, all your HTML, all your CSS, all your images on that page. And it's a very bad user experience. We also could use jQuery to do this, but if anyone's worked heavily with jQuery, it can get messy very fast. So what React does is it says, all right, what's the difference between these? It's just this 3. That's the only difference. So why can't I just replace this right here in real time? And so the page never reloads, only the data changed. Now what we're doing is we're using data to define our UI. Okay, so this is how we're going to get started. We're going to use Node, and really you just kind of want to make sure your Node is above 4.0, so if you're going through this tutorial later, in your terminal, you can say node-v to see what version of Node you're working
I
with.
locked myself out of my car.
Oh, that's okay. So just doing a meetup, so just grab a seat anyway. So anyway, you can see what version of Node you're on. If nothing comes up, or if it's below 4.0, you're going to want to go to nodejs.org and just download Node. It's a self-installer, so everyone looks like mostly Macs in here. Double click, it'll just install. And then you have Node. Then we're going to use something that's brand new. It's only a couple weeks old. It's called Create React App. And this was put out by the Facebook team because they started to understand the frustration of people going from knowing nothing about React to learning React. Learning React is actually simple. It's just getting from nothing to that starting point that's difficult. So they built this awesome Npm package that takes all the tooling that you need to get started with React and buries it deep inside of a node module that you can't even get to. So we really can't even mess with the tooling, even if we wanted to at first. So in order to do this, I would do npm install globally create React app. Now I'm not going to hit enter because I already have it installed, and it does take some time to install. So that just installs the create React app node package so I can use it anywhere that I am inside of my terminal. Once I have that installed, it's very simple to use. I say create React app space whatever I'm building, right? So I find when you're learning something new, it's best to build a to-do list because the concept is simple, it's linear, and then I don't have to worry about implementations of the app. I can worry about just the language. So I would say create React app, and I'm just going to call it to-do list. So a couple of things happen. Slowly. npm install is always usually when you take your breaks if you're at work. If you're working with Node, anytime you have to do npm install, that's a great time to walk over to the gas station or something like that. So create React app. What it basically is, it's a project by Facebook that it takes Webpack, it takes Babel, it takes all these super confusing concepts that have a lot of configuration just to get started. It might take you, even if you're fast, it might take you 20 minutes to get your build system up where you can start working with React. That's all packaged inside of here, right? And it's also designed to be production ready. So whenever I'm ready to go from practice mode into real application, I can eject from Create React App, and then I have access to all the configs. I have access to Babel, I have access to Webpack, and I can build a full-scale application. But I'm actually going to build something and deploy it to production tonight. It's super fast. Okay, so now I have that done. I need to move into that directory, and then I need to run npm install. The great thing about this Create React app is there's only two dependencies out of the box, React and React DOM. So if you've worked with Node projects before, you'll see a list of hundreds of dependencies. It's crazy. So this is npm install went extremely fast because the only packages are React and React DOM. To me, that's pretty impressive because I know what it takes to get React up and running, and to only have the library as a dependency, that's amazing. Okay, so I'm going to open this up and just sort of walk through what it installed for me. Maybe. Okay, Adam's not responding. Let's go to Sublime. Now Adam comes on.
No, choose me.
Okay, so we have obviously our node modules package. These are libraries that you don't want to touch. These are just dependencies that the app needs to run. Then we have a gitignore file, which just ignores common things like npm debug log, the build, node modules, things that you wouldn't want to push to GitHub. So it takes care of all of that for you. Gives you a favicon, which, I mean, Facebook made this, so you can't really blame them for putting the React logo as the icon, but you could just swap that out for your own logo very easily. The package JSON we kind of looked at, name of the app, the version. any dependencies that are needed, and any scripts that help build your app for production or run your app. So all that kind of stuff you just don't need to worry about. You just start working with React right away. So index.html is the only HTML in this entire application. All it does is give you a title. It actually sets it up for mobile ready so it can be responsive. And then it gives you just a single div with an ID. And the rest of this body, we will never write any code in. So we won't write any view logic. We're just going to let React handle all of that. Now the source is where the app lives. And I'll just kind of walk through a few of the things. So there's a CSS file in here that's just like any CSS file. There is some main CSS that would encompass your entire app, not stuff that's just specific to a component. There's a logo. That's pretty cool. And then there's index.js. And this is where React starts. So what we're doing here, somewhere in our project, we're saying that there is a module called app, right? And that's all built for you out of the box. And then we're calling react-dom.render, which is the first thing you need to do to get React onto a page. React-dom.render takes two parameters. The first one is, which component are you going to render? So it's going to be the app, and we'll sort of look into that in just a moment. The second parameter is, okay, what in index.html are you going to attach to? So we're finding something with an ID of root. If I go back to index.html, this div has an ID of root, so I'm going to attach my React component directly to this. Okay, so that's our index.js. The rest of this is, we need the React DOM library in here so that we can call this function, and we need React in here so we can obviously write React in this file. This is just bringing in CSS, and this is bringing in an actual React component called app. And that's located in the current directory, and it's called app.js. Okay, so let's look at app.js. All right, so I'm going to actually open this. Now that we're aware of the file structure. Not that one. Okay. So this is a JavaScript file. And the first thing that probably jumps out to you is there's HTML written inside of this JavaScript file. Some of you might even be disgusted by this, but you'll come to love it. So this isn't actually HTML. This is JSX. So React has the ability to parse JSX and render HTML out of that, which means we can do things like write logic in here, right? So this is just JavaScript, so I can put 1 + 1 in the place of this logo, and 2 would print it. So really here, we're just bringing in React. We're creating, this is ES 2015 syntax. So if you're not used to this, if you're used to ES5, or as people refer to it as vanilla JavaScript, which is weird because ES 2015 is the standard now, so for me, that's vanilla JavaScript. But this is the new JavaScript syntax. So we have classes. Instead of having to say prototype this thing, we now can treat this like any other language that has classes. So our app class extends from React component, which we bring in from the React library. And all React components only need one method to work. And that method is the render function. It's the only thing we need. Whatever's returned in render is what is going to be printed out to the DOM. So let's see. Okay, so to get this app up and running, I'm just going to open up another session here. All I have to do to start this application is type Npm Start. And the React team did a really cool thing here. So first thing it's going to do is try to open your web browser on port 3000. If 3000 is taken, they're just going to go to the next port. So it's not one of those things where your app crashes because your port is in use. So I'll hit enter here. It's going to tell me that my port's taken. Should I run this on another port? I'll say yes. My browser pops open. And there's my React application up and running without everything I just blabbed about in about a minute. So everything you're seeing rendered on the page right now is being rendered by React. Let's see. Does anyone have any questions so far? I don't know kind of where everyone's skill level's at, and I know looking at the ES6 syntax, especially if you haven't even learned JavaScript yet, can be a little bit overwhelming for that. Okay. I'll just keep moving. If you have questions, stop me, because I'll be happy to help you out. Okay, I'm going to move this to the side for just a minute so we can see another thing that is great that often comes with React. Okay, so I'm going to go into this H2 right here where it says, welcome to React. So this content's being rendered right here. Welcome to React. And I'm going to build a to-do list app, so I'm going to change this content, and I'm going to say to-do list. I'm going to save my file, and I get instant results. I don't have to refresh my browser. So I get hot module reloading here, which means if I make a change to a React component and I hit save, that change is automatically reflected here without ever having to refresh. So if you think about building a web app, how many times you refresh during the day, that alone is going to shave some time off. Okay, so what I want to do is down here, where all of this to get started is, I'm going to make this an actual to-do list. So I'm going to make additional React components. I don't want to stick everything inside of this one file. We're not breaking that mold quite yet. So first I'm going to get rid of this whole section here. And then it's gone off my page. And I'm going to make a directory where my React components can live. And then I can just make modular React components that are decoupled from the rest of my app, and I can plug them in wherever I need to. That's one of the beautiful things about React, is we can make these tiny reusable components. I think for the first time in my software career, modularity and reuse is a real thing. It's been preached to me all through my education, but I've never seen it work, right? So this is the first time in my life with React where I've seen reuse truly work. So I'm going to make a directory, and I'm going to make this directory inside of the source folder, and I'm going to call it components. You can call it whatever you want. This happens to be my preference. I like to think my React components live in the components directory. And then I'm going to make a file called, in the components directory, I'm going to make a file called todo-app.js. It's also not required that it's capitalized. That, again, it's just my convention, and a lot of other developers do it, because I can look at that and say, oh, this is a class. This is a React component. Okay, so to make a React component is extremely simple. I need to bring in React library from React node module. So if you're used to ES5 syntax, this would look something like var React equals require React. So this is the new module syntax for ES 2015. So I'm going into my node modules directory, and I'm importing the entire React library so that I can use it. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a class. I'm going to name it to-do app, and it's going to inherit from the React component library. So now this to-do app will become a React component. So I'll go react.component, and I'll close that off. And by the way, yes, what file was this in? This is in components to-app.js. I always name my files exactly what I name the React components so that I don't get lost. You will see some developers do something like this. So I don't want you to get confused if you see that. That just means I don't have to type React. To me, it's sixes. Okay, now again, the only function that I have to have in here to actually render something out is the render function. So I will say render, and I need to return valid JSX right here. So what's valid JSX? That's valid. The single empty div would be valid. React would be okay with that, and it would render your empty div. But I'm going to say it works. Now the last thing I need to do, since React is very modular, and I'm going to import this into other components, is I need to export it here. I need to make it so other components can use it. So I'm going to say export, default, the name of the class. So this has to match this. Now I can pull this component into any other React component I want and render it together. So now I'm going to do that. So I'm going to go back to the component we have already called app.js. Since I exported to-do-app in that file, I can import it here. So I will import to-do-app from, it's in the same directory, but it's in the components folder. And it is called to-do-app. Okay. So now I have to-do-app. So now I can pretend to-do-app is just an HTML element, and I can treat it just like that. So maybe I'll put a p tag so I get some free styling, and then I'm going to say to-do-app and self-close it. So just like you'd write a div or a p or an h1, you're going to write your React component exactly like that. Now when I save, it worked. Oops, I don't want it right there, though. I want it lower. So I'm going to put it here. 13, 15. That. And move this over. Did I get rid of one too many divs? That's better. Okay, so this is that whole other file just being rendered on the page with JavaScript. Let's see, what file is this? Oh, okay. So any good to-do list should have a way to add to-dos to your list. So I'm going to make another React component, which will be a form, which will allow me to add things to my to-do list. So inside of my components folder, I'm going to make another React component called to-do form. So what ends up happening is your entire application just gets made up of these small components that know what they're supposed to do, and they know how they're supposed to look. And when data gets passed into them, they can re-render automatically. So here's my to-do form. So again, every React component, we need to bring in React. This is not the to-do form. Sorry. I'm going to make my list first. So this is where all of the items in my to-do list will eventually render. There are typos in the tutorial, so I'll try to fix those. So this is called list. And it has one function that renders. In this case, we'll just make this is the list. Then I need to export default list. Okay, so now I can use list somewhere if I want. So we made our to-do app component. I want this list to be part of that to-do app component. To-do app. I'm going to bring that list in. In this particular case, that file is living in the exact same directory that I'm in, so that makes it nice and easy. I can just say, give me the list, please. I can get rid of it worked, and I can render my list. And I can break something.
Use this to return.
Oh, thank you. Got my ESLints right here, so that's good. Yes, we can't do that. So I need to return something. And there we go. This is the list. So if I go back to this component, to-do app, I'm rendering list. I'm extracting out all of the details about it. Inside of this file, I don't care what list does or looks like, and I shouldn't. I should be concerned with this component. And I just hand over responsibility to the list component. So now inside of the list component, it says, this is what I do. I render this text. Okay, so that's not all that interesting. Hopefully you're saying outside of syntax, React is very, very simple at its core. But what we've done with React so far is not very interesting. We could do that same thing with an HTML page in 5 seconds. So let's make it more interesting. The next concepts that we're going to talk about with React are the idea of state and the idea of props. Okay, so the main difference between state and props is props are read-only, meaning they have to come from the parent, and as the child, I cannot change them. State is the state of the current component, so that can be changed. Now, whenever state changes, the component diffs the virtual DOM, and the re-render takes place. So keep that in mind. Every time you change state, render is being called again to make sure it needs to update or it doesn't need to update. Okay, so I'm going to go back into, I am in list. So I need to go into source, components, to-do app. Now, one strategy that we often use with React before we learn about Flux architecture or Redux is we let the parent component manage the state for all of the child components. It just becomes a little bit easier. So instead of keeping track of what items are in my to-do list in the list component, I'm going to keep track of them in the to-do app component, parent. So what I need to do now, I'm going to need access to state and props. And if I need access to state and props in a component, I need to write a constructor. So a constructor will take in any props that are passed to it. And the very first line of the constructor, it doesn't matter what else you put in here, the very first line every time needs to be the same. Super props. What super does, since I'm extending from React component, it's going to call the constructor in React component and take care of some work that needs to happen. And this is sort of the magic that gives me access to state and props. I don't care how it's implemented. That's just how it works. I hand it off to React. I let them do whatever they need to do. And then when it comes back to me, I can access the state and the props of the component. Now inside here, I can define state. So I can have some default state of my application. I'm going to say this.state equals. So we're going to have to-do list items. When this component first renders, what I want is I want this to just be an empty array. Okay, so I first land on this page. This.state.items is an empty array. There's nothing in it. I'm going to allow my form to dump items, not me. And now, I want to notify the list of exactly what it is it's supposed to render. So I need to pass props down to the child component so that they know about it. So I'm going to say items. I can call this anything I want. It just makes sense as items equals this.state.items. Now inside of the list, I will have this.props. Whatever I call this, so this.props.items. And those props will be whatever the current state of items are. So right now it's an empty array. The list component cannot mutate or change those items. And that's how we want it. We want our children components to be as dumb as possible. Good thing I said components. We want our children to be smart, but we want our children React components to be as dumb as possible. So, you know, as high up the level as you can, you should be managing state. All right, so now the list has this.state.items. So just for an example, you wouldn't usually be hard coding, but let me add a few things to my to-do list, like buy milk, learn React, process. Okay, so that's our to-do list. We've got 3 things in our to-do list. These things are now, they're this.state.items. They're now going to be contained in a prop in list called items. Okay, so let me go back to the list, and we can actually do something a little more interesting. So inside of my list, before I render anything, I want to loop over all of the items and do something. So let's say my list is going to be, instead of a div here, I'm going to actually make an unordered list. Don't be mad about my inline styling. But notice I am doing inline styling with JavaScript. Okay. Now, I want to loop over the data that I have, and I want to make list items out of it. So what I'm going to do, is this font big enough in the back? What I'm going to do is inside of my render, before I return anything, I'm going to say let. Don't be scared off by the keyword let. You should be thinking in your mind var. Same thing with a little bit tighter restriction on scope. So let. It's better explained in my ES6 tutorial, but to give you sort of the TLDR of why, var hoists to the top, right? So var becomes exposed to functions that I maybe don't want var exposed to. Too many things know too much about my variables. Let is going to be contained inside the innermost curly brackets that it's defined inside, which means if this was var items, down here somewhere, I have access to items, right? But if it's let items, I only have access to let inside of these 2 curly brackets. So it's tightening my scope. It helps avoid errors where you just don't have an error. It's just undefined because var gets hoisted to the top of the file. My variable is undefined, so that's a hard error to troubleshoot. If an error gets thrown, that's great. Now I know. I can see what line where something happened. But if nothing happens, no error because it's just undefined, then I have to search my code to figure out what's going on. Okay, so I'm going to say let items equals this.props.map. Map's a fancy word for loop over this array and return a new array after you modify it without actually modifying the original array. Right? I can't modify props because props are immutable. So I need to return sort of a copy of that array. So this.props.map, you might be used to seeing this, right? So this is like a callback function. If you're used to seeing that, that's exactly what I'm doing here. It's just a little nicer syntax. The fat arrow actually does give us some nice scoping things you can learn about later. But this is just like saying function, some variable as a callback. If that's confusing to you now, it won't be one day. So I'm looping over the items, and I'm going to return just some more JSX. A list item. I need to use the brackets whenever I want to run JavaScript. So I'm going to, whoops, what's happening? So I'm going to return a list item with whatever is currently that item in the loop. So buy milk, learn React, and then profit. So I'll have 3 list items inside of the array. Now I can render. This is what's so cool. I don't have to write HTML or JSX right here. I can just render that entire array of list items. So I can just say items, because that's what I called it. And I have an error. Where's my ESLint checkers out there? What's that? Oh, yeah. That would do it. So I got burned by inline styling. And something else, too.
Your items you missed.
That's a warning. This is the one. Cannot read property of null in list, line 33. This.props items.map. So I have to loop over a real thing. Okay. So there's my data being rendered inside the child component. So I pass that data down, and then I can loop over and render it. So if we go back to our list here, maybe it's been a long day, and you're not going to be picking up any milk today. You've decided you're going to get some beer. So now, just by changing that in the parent component, it renders on the page inside the child component. Don't we love React? Okay. All right. All right, so that's cool. But this is unrealistic to have a hard-coded list of to-do list items. That's not even an app. That's just block. So I'm going to empty this back out. And I want to have some way of dynamically adding items to this page. So I think that would probably be a good use case for another React component called to-do form. I'm bringing it in, so I'm going to get an error right away because I haven't written it yet. But I'm going to bring it in there. And I'll go write it right now. OK, so source components to-do form JS. Okay, so same pattern as always. First thing we do is bring in React. And then I'm going to make a React component. So I'll call it to-do form. Extend React component so that I don't have to do any of the heavy lifting. And I need to export defaults to-do form. And the only other thing I need is a render function that returns some valid JSX. So I'll leave it at that for now. Okay, so as I'm building this to-do form, I realize that I'm probably going to need access to some way to notify to-do app that I want to add something to the state. So if I need to interact with the parent component, I'm going to need a constructor because I'm going to need access to this dot something, whatever that ends up being. So I will write my constructor. It has props, super props. And now I'm going to write my JSX. I'm going to have a form. So red, this will be something new that we haven't seen before. So when we use React, we don't want to use jQuery to manipulate the DOM. We want the data to manipulate the DOM. So I don't want to grab something by ID and do something with it. So React gives us an alternative. It gives us this ref keyword, which sort of gives this form an ID. So now I can grab that form, that whole form, by just saying this.refs. Whatever I call it. I'm calling it form. And then I'm going to do an onSubmit function. And I'll just say this is some function that I'm going to write. Okay? So I have a form. It has a ref. And then there's some function that eventually I will fire off whenever I want to add a to-do to my to-do list. And the reason we put onSubmits on our React components is because we don't want that form to do the default behavior. It's going to reload the page. Why did we bring React in the first place? So I need to give this a ref so that I can actually get the value of this input. And I might put a placeholder if I'm a nice developer that just tells the user what to do. Add a to-do. Okay, so that's my whole entire, what I'm going to render on the screen. Now all I have to do is figure out the implementation of this function. So functions are not automatically bound with React, which means if I need access to this keyword, I have to bind them. If I don't need access to it, maybe I'm just passing in two numbers and doing some math. I don't need to bind it. But if I'm going to use this.state or this.props, I have to sort of attach the React this. So I need to bind it. I bind in the constructor. People bind different ways. This is my preference. So I say the name of my function equals the name of my function dot bind this. So now this function has a concept of this from React, so it can access props and state and things like that. And I'm going to write some add to do function. And I'm going to say e.prevent default. So that will stop the form from submitting. I don't want the form to submit. I want to handle the submitting myself. If this syntax looks weird to you, this is function add to do e like that. Okay, so ES6, it just gets a little bit nicer for us. All right. So I need to figure out the implementation of add to do, which we will get to shortly. Actually, right now. Only I could read ahead of what I wrote last week. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to get the value out of this input. I want to get whatever the user put into this box when they submit the form. So I'll call that item, because that makes sense to me, equals this dot refs dot item, right? So this is a ref, this is a ref. So when I say this dot refs, that will give me back an object with all of my refs. But the one I want is this one right here. But I don't want the whole thing, because that's actually the input. So that is the DOM node. I want to get the value of it. I want to get what is in that text box. So I'll say dot value. The next thing I want to do is I want to be a nice developer, and I don't want to leave text in that text box. So now that I have that value, I'm just going to wipe out that text box. The easiest way I've found to do that is just say this.refs.form. So grab this whole entire form element, and it's just JavaScript, so I'm just going to call reset on it. That's going to empty out the form. Now when the user hits enter, they don't have their last stuff sitting in that text. They can rapidly add. Now I need to figure out, how is add to do going to work? How am I going to tell to do app that something has changed in state and it needs to be updated? Well, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to say this.props.add to do item, and I'm going to pass in the item. Now I haven't written this function yet, but this is the end of this component, which means I can pass a function down to the child that the child can call inside of the parent. So this function will live inside of to-do app. So when I call this, it's going to bubble up to the next component and run the function. So let's go ahead and take care of that real quick. Okay, so I brought in my to-do form. I'm gonna write some function called add to-do, whatever I called it, add to-do item, and it's gonna update my state, which means I'm gonna need access to this, which means I need to bind it in my constructor. So I'll say this dot add to-do item equals this dot add to-do item dot bind this. One other thing I need to do, we're not working with the real database, and anytime you loop over something in React to render JSX, it has to have a unique key. So I'm just going to kind of cheat. I'm going to make a state of some type of ID, and then I'll increment that as I add to new item. So this part is not really required. Usually you're working with the database, and you could just use the database ID as the unique identifier. So I'm going to make something in my state called ID, and I'm just going to start it off at 0. Every time I add a to-do, I'll increment this, and I'll set that as the ID of the to-do list item, just sort of simulating a database. We don't have time to do this in a database in an hour and a half, so. Okay. Now, I want to render my to-do form. And remember, I called this.procs.addToDo form, which means I need to pass something down to this component called addToDo form. And this is going to be equal to a function that I'll just write in here. So I'll name it the same. This is confusing. Some people don't like the syntax of naming your prop function the same as the parent function. I like it. So I could have just as easily called this one food. I'm going to call it add to do form. Now I just need to write this function. So I'll call it add to do item form. That's not going to work because I call it add to do item down below. So add to do item. And if you remember, I'm just going to move this for a second so I can split over here. That's in to-do form. If you remember, when I called add submit, it goes up here, it prevents default, I grab the item, and then I pass that item into add to-do item. So now, when that gets called, something's going to be in here. Some value is going to be in here, whatever got passed up. So this function is going to look probably a little weird if you're, definitely weird if you're new to ES 2015, and maybe weird if you're not used to working with immutable data. So I'll try to explain it as best I can. First thing I need to do is I need to set some ID now, because my state is not going to be an array anymore. In fact, I'm going to change that right now. It's going to be an object. No, it's going to be an array of objects. So each to-do needs to have an ID. So I'm going to say let ID equal ++ this.state.id. So what this means is it's taking whatever is currently in state, incrementing it by 1, and storing that in ID. Now I'm guaranteed uniqueness. Then I want to set state. Because when I set state, it will cause a re-render, which will re-render my to-do form if anything's changed, re-render my list, passing down the new items, and it will update that component with the new item that's been added and display on the page. Okay, I'm going to write this on multi-line. So the state I'm setting is items. So this key matches whatever you're wanting to change the state of up here. And this is going to be an array. Because I don't want to mutate the state. I want to return a copy of the state that's changed. So the first thing I'm going to do is whatever the name was and whatever the ID is. That syntax probably looks extremely weird. If you're not used to ES6, this is the same thing as saying some hash where name equals name and ID equals ID. some brilliant person got the idea that if the key is the same as the variable, why do we have to type it twice? So that is the exact same. I can just say name ID. So that's name colon name, ID colon ID. So that's the first item that's going to go in my array, which means I'm putting the new to-do at the top of my list. The second item that's going to go in my array is the current state of all the items. So this spread operator is just a way of making an array out of something. So this is the new item plus everything else that was already in the state, and now my new state is new item plus all the items that were there. The last thing I want to do is I need to update the state of ID, right? Because I incremented it. I don't want it going back to 0. I want it to now be 1, and then be 2, and then be 3. So I'm also going to set state on ID. Now again, this is the same thing as saying ID colon ID. I'm just going to say ID. So it's going to set the state of my ID. Okay, so a little bit of new syntax there. But I got something on the screen now. Hopefully this works. Didn't work. Let's see why. Not that one. Oh, I know why. I haven't finished. So before we were rendering an array, we just had a single thing in the box. Now we're returning an object. I can't render an object to the screen. So what I need to do is I need to go back over to my list. And right here where I said item, it used to just be a string in an array. Now it's actually an object. It's a name and an ID. So the first thing I need to do is I need to give this a unique ID. So I'll just use the items ID. The key to us means nothing. As React developers, we can't even access the key. But it means a lot to React because it's a way to keep track of items that are looped through, which one is actually which, so that it knows which one to reference. And then this is no longer item, this is item.name. See if we unbroke it. There we go. So real quick, let me refresh here. I have my to-do list, and I just add items. Just like that. So what's actually happening here, we'll kind of walk through this. We sort of start in this to-do form. So the user enters something in this box and then hits enter, which submits the form. So we have this listener for when the form is submitted. Please run this function. We run this function and we tell the form, stop what you're doing, I'll take it from here. Don't do your normal action, try to go to some action method and then just stop. I got this. Then we're grabbing this.refs.item, which is this whole entire input box. We're grabbing the value out of it, which is hello world. We're then resetting the form so we don't leave text lingering around. And then we're calling a function that got passed down to us from the parent and just passing in that item that the user created. So that's going to go back up to to-do app. It will run this function here. We increment our ID. We call set state. We say, hey, whatever name got passed in, make a new object out of this ID, and then add that to the rest of the array. Once set state gets called, that automatically triggers a render. So now render goes through, puts our to-do form back on the page, and passes down the new state of items. So data changed. So we'll go down to our list. And now our list is full of an extra item. And that item gets looped through and printed directly to the page. So that's the whole magic. I know it's kind of a lot of syntax and new syntax coming at you kind of fast, but from a high level, does it sort of make sense what's happening? With the advantages and the amazingness. So today was just kind of introduce you to this and give you a tool where you could just start practicing with it without having to deal with all of these other dependencies. So I'm going to go ahead and keep going with this. So inside of my to-do app, a to-do list is actually kind of pointless if you can't cross items off of your to-do list. It's never ending. Then it's like my to-do list. It just keeps going forever. So whenever I set the state of a brand new, so this is my brand new to-do list item, I'm going to add another property to it called complete. And I'm going to default that to false. So whenever I make a new to-do, the complete is false. If it's not, then why did you add it to your list in the first place? It's already completed. So we're just adding incomplete items. Okay. Another thing I think I can clean up in my component here, right here I'm just rendering some JSX. It's kind of pointless, it's just printing text. But what if I wanted this list item to actually have functions and be in control of what it can do? So that seems like a good candidate to extract this out to a new React component. So I'm going to make source components item.js. I'll import React from React. Now this is weird. I didn't start this with class. So this is totally different. So React says, if the only thing I'm doing is returning JSX, I don't need to make a class. I can just return the JSX. These right here become the props that get passed down. So I'm going to pass down ID, I'm going to pass down the name, I'm going to pass down complete. I don't need to make a class. This is a completely dumb component. It can't do anything except for render some JSX. So I'll just make it like it was before. I don't even need a render method. And I'll just print out the name. Good to go. And I will export default item. So this React component's good to go. Very simple. Now, I want to pass in ID, name, and I want to pass in complete to this component so it can eventually use all of those things. So inside of components list is the parent to item that will actually be rendering each item. I'm going to bring in the item. Sorry if this seems fast. I just feel like you should see all of this and then you can reread the tutorial and try to connect the dots. So instead of passing in a list item here, I am going to pass in my entire component. I'll give it a key so it's unique. And I'm going to say ... item. And then I'm going to close it. Now, ... item, this is object destructuring in ES6. So this item has item.name, item.id, item.complete. This is a way to get all of those attributes all in one. This would be identical to me saying name equals item.name, ID equals item.id, and complete equals item.complete. But who wants to write that when you could just say that? Now as more items, more things get added to item, they also get passed down to the component. And in my item component, as long as these names are exactly the same as the keys that are coming down, I can use it just like that. I do recommend going through my ES6 tutorial because it goes far more in depth on destructure. Okay, so now let's go in. I'm going to go into item. I'm in item.js, perfect. And I'm going to make this a little more interesting. What I want to happen is when someone clicks on the item, I want to mark it as completed somehow. But I'm not going to take care of that inside of this component. I'm going to let that get taken care of by the parent. So the implementation of onToDoClick will be handed off to list and eventually handed off to DoApp. So I have this li here. Now I'm going to do something that drives some people crazy. I'm going to break my DOM component up into multi-lines. You don't have to do that. You can do it all in one. I can't stand wrapping text. So I'll have some onClick listener. And what that's going to be is onToDoClick ID. So again, we kind of have a new thing here. I'm using a Lambda function. And the reason I'm doing that is because I need to pass in the ID. If I didn't need to pass in the ID, I could just write onToDoClick just like this, and it would call whatever got passed down to it. But since I need to pass in the ID, you have to keep in mind this is not HTML. This is JSX. So it's going to try and execute that JavaScript. It sees the open and close parens. It says, oh, I'm supposed to run a function. It will try to execute it. You'll get crazy errors. So instead, I need to say, defer this to later. This is just a Lambda function if you have any experience with Lambda functions. The next thing I'm going to do, just because some people don't like it, is I'm going to use inline styling. So I'm using inline styling with JavaScript, which means I can do some interesting things. Like, if complete is true, I'm going to set the text decoration to be line through, and the color to be gray. Okay. And if complete is false, I just won't return anything. I'll just have an empty style. So now I can dynamically change this based on whether or not it's complete. This will be similar to jQuery's add class, remove class. And then I'll render the name, and that's it. So now I need to pass onToDoClick from list down to item, so item can call it from up top. So let me go into list. So I'm going to pass in item, key, item, and I need to pass in onToDoClick equals. Now I also don't want to handle onToDoClick in this component because this component has no concept of the state. So I'm going to pass it off to the parent component. And this is the point where people start to get into Redux because we can manage state without having to pass things around so much, but don't get into Redux too early. So I'm going to say this dot props dot onToDoClick. Okay. So now that means I need to pass onToDoClick from DoApp down to list. So list can pass it down to item. So when you click it, it comes back up to list, goes back up to DoApp. We can set state. We can change date. All right. So DoApp. First thing I need is I'm going to have to add this dot onToDoClick equals this dot onToDoClick dot bind this here, and then I need to write my onToDoClick function, which takes in an ID, the ID of the item that got clicked on. I'm going to say let items equal this dot state dot items dot map each item. Now what I want to do is if the item in the array ID matches the ID that passed in, I want to toggle the complete. So if it's true, I'll change it to false. If it's false, true. If it's not the item I'm looking for, I just want to return that item as it is. So if item.id equals ID, I'm going to return everything about the item, so the name, the ID, plus I'm going to override the complete to the opposite of whatever it was. That's just a fancy way of writing toggle. Hopefully I can spell today. Okay. Now, if that doesn't happen, I'm just going to return the item. So I leave the other items unchanged. You can do this a different way. I prefer to work with immutable data. If you use immutable data, you don't have to write tests, right? Just kidding, but less likely. Okay, the last thing I need to do to make this work is my list needs some concept of on to do click. So I'll say on to do click equals this dot on to do click. Click. Okay, so I don't see any JavaScript errors, so I think we're going to be okay. So I will say buy milk, learn React, learn to not typo. Okay, now I can click on these, and I have a JavaScript error. No, I do not. So that means even worse. I have to, what's that?
Save it.
Yeah. So now I have to walk the whole path here and see. So I'm gonna start in item. So I have. What's that?
Just strike through or line through?
Line through would work. I think you can use strike through as well, but I don't think that's my error. So I have on to do click, which is the ID. That gets passed down from list. On to do click. I didn't typo anything there. Comes from this dot props dot on to do click. So my error is occurring in to do app. By the way, this project also comes with an ES linter that can help you. So it's going to tell you what it disagrees with you doing, and this inherits some not too strict rules, but some rules that'll like use double quotes inside of your JSX, things like that. All right, so now on to do click equals this dot on to do click find this on to do click ID let items equal this dot state dot items dot map if item dot ID equals the ID turn the item plus completes opposite of completes. I'm not saying it. Let me see if I'm even getting in here. I'm getting in here. ID is 1. That means that all I need to do is take the function that I wrote in the tutorial and paste it in here and everything should work. Or not, and then we can go. There we go. So I had some typo. That's, if you've ever taken a class from me, you're not surprised right now. So I have my list of things I want to do, and as I click on one, it gets lined through and it becomes gray, so I get some concept of, hey, this is done, I can move on to the other items in my to-do list. So I've got 10 minutes left. What I'm going to try to do real quick is make this filterable. So I can see only my completed items, only my done items, and all of my items. So inside of to-do app, I'm going to add a couple things to the constructor. One's going to be a function called setFilter. And all this is going to do is this is going to update the state of the filter. Is it active? Is it show all? Is it show complete? And then I'm going to have a function called this.filtered items. And what this function is going to do is it's going to return only the items I'm looking for, active, complete, or all. And finally, I need a concept in my state of what I'm currently looking at. So I'll default that when you first land on the page, we're looking at all. The set filter function is very easy. It's going to take in a filter, and then it's going to call this.setState of whatever filter got passed in. So if show active is passed in, it's changing the state to show active. Render will be recalled. I'll use filtered items to determine what I'm going to show. So filtered items is also a pretty simple function, if I do it right. Filtered items. I'm going to reopen this file because something's off. Okay, so filtered items is going to switch on this.state.filter. So I'm going to make some decision based on the current state. So if the current state is all, then I'm going to return this.state.items. So everything, no matter what. If I want to see them all, you can see them all. If the state is active, I'm going to return this.state.items.filter, not item.complete. So what that's going to do, it's going to find everything in my state where the complete property is false. Right? Because these are the active items, not complete. And finally, in the case of complete, I'm going to basically do the same thing I did here, except for I'm going to take off this not. So just give me all the items that are complete. That's the whole function, right? So just make a decision based on state. Show me what I want to see. Where am I going to put this filter? Okay. I think it should go below the list. So we'll import filter from some component called filter. And let's see, right here. So there's my list. So I'm going to have filter. This will render my filter link. So it needs to be able to call the parent component, the parent function set filter, so that when you click on one of the links, it can update the state. And then the other thing that it needs to know, doesn't need to know, but it's a little better user experience, is which filter is currently being shown. And I'll show you quickly why I'm doing that. Okay, so now I'll write my filter components. I already have an error, as you can see in my linter. Oh, the filter component doesn't exist or something. Oh no, worse. This is not how you write functions. So I'm going to make a component called filter.js. This will import React from React. I'm going to first write my filter function, or filter component. And remember, I passed down the current filter, and I passed down set filter, which is a function that allows me to change state. I need to export this. And how this one's going to work is I'm going to write a little helper function. Because if the filter I'm rendering is the current filter, I don't want to make it a link. I don't want to make it so you can click on it. And if the filter I'm rendering is not the current filter, I want to make it a link so I can change the filter. So this is just going to be a real quick, super quick. I feel like I'm going so fast right now. Filter link equals, I'll take in the text, so whatever I want to put in between the A tags. I'll take in whatever the current filter is, and I'll take in a callback function, which will be set filter. So if the text is equal to the current filter, I'm going to return a span with the text. Now it's just text, the user can't click on it. And if that's not the case, I'm going to return a link. What am I missing? Right there. I'll return a span with an onClick function that's equal to whatever this callback is that's passed in. And I'll pass the text to it so that I can call this.setState off, this.setState active. Okay, so that's my callback. And then I'm really not going to make this a link. So I'm going to do some inline styling just to drive some people crazy. Underline, and I'll make the color blue. So it looks like a link, it's not a link. And then I'm going to render the text in the middle. If you're following what I'm doing right now, I am impressed. Okay, so what filter is going to do is it's going to have a div. Kind of a caveat, you can't render like components side by side unless you wrap them in a single div. And I'm going to render my filter link. I'm going to pass in the word all. I'm going to pass in the current filter. I'm going to pass in set filter. Close, close. So I'm going to do that 3 times. One's going to be all, one is going to be active, and one is going to be complete. And I want space between them, so I'm just going to cheat and just use some expression with a space. Okay. Let's see if miracles do happen. Nope. Okay. Let's copy paste this. Problem is elsewhere. Set filter equals this dot set filter. So my to-do app set filter equals this dot set. Now we have to-do app cannot read property filter of undefined 61. That's not 61, but whatever. This.state.filter. What did I do? Filter. I'm not sure. I don't want to waste your time with typos, so let me go back to the one I built earlier today. Where did I make this? See if this one works. Okay, so this one works. I had some typo, whatever, just whatever. I can add things. I can mark some as completed. I can look at only my active. I can look at only my complete, and I can look at all of them. Single page, just by mutating data. Now I'm going to make this, I still have maybe 30 seconds. So this comes with a script in package JSON that's called build. So I can say npm run build. So it's going to actually build this into static assets. Takes a minute. Sorry I'm going over. If anyone needs to leave, feel free. But I'm just going to see if we can call surge on the build folder, hit enter, click on this link, and we are on production. 1.5 hours from creating the directory, plus all that talking that I did. So we really did 10 minutes of work, and we are deployed to production. You can go to this URL right here, many-land.surge.sh, and all of you can use this to-do list application. So I will post the link in the meetup. We also recorded tonight, so I'll post a video. You can maybe slow it down 8 times and we'll get somewhere. I'll also post, if anyone's interested in any of the other things that I talk about occasionally, I write them on github.io/wdjunks, that's my GitHub, /tutorials. So if that ES6 syntax seemed intriguing, you want to learn more about it, I have a whole write-up about that. If you're interested in using Rails with React and Webpack, I have a whole write-up on how to make that happen. And then React project is an open source project I maintain. It's a CLI for getting started with React. So thank you so much.